Welcome back to the Fly With Her podcast. I'm your host, Aitana.
And I'm Maya. We're so excited to have you here with us for another episode.
Today's guest is a true trailblazer. She's best known as Britain's first female fast jet pilot, earning her wings with the Royal Air Force before flying with the legendary 617 Squadron.
Since then, she's gone on to build an incredible career beyond the cockpit as a business leader, an author, a leadership coach, a keynote speaker, and founder of Sultan Limited.
Jo, we're so honoured to have you with us today. Welcome to the Fly With Her podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you, Maya. Nice to meet you, Aitana. And great. The Fly With Her podcast. What a lovely, lovely name you have.
Thank you. So to get us started, Jo, could you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about your journey into aviation?
Of course, yeah. So Jo Salter, as you said, I ended up becoming Britain's first female fast jet pilot. But how on earth do you learn about aviation if you don't know anybody that's doing it? So I never had any thoughts. And I grew up at a time when there really weren't many people going off on holiday a great deal. It wasn't like it is today. And so I had been to Biggin Hill Air Show once many years before. Didn't even cross my mind about flying. And of course, it was much more restricted when I was younger, as women weren't allowed to do it and certainly weren't allowed to fly in the Air Force. But the Royal Air Force were giving these sponsorships to study engineering. And I applied. It was the first year that they'd ever offered these sponsorships, and they gave 10% of them to women. And I applied and managed to get a place. So I joined the Royal Air Force to be an engineering officer when I was 18 years old. And it was the same year, in fact, that Top Gun, the movie, came out. Not Top Gun Maverick, but Top Gun, the movie, coincidentally, as I joined the Air Force.
So you began at the RAF in engineering, and then you ended up becoming the first female fast jet pilot. How on earth did that happen? Did you realize that when you became Britain's first female fast jet pilot that you were making history, or were you simply focused on just becoming the best pilot you could be?
Yeah, Maya, and I love the way you put that, because actually when we go through life, we often don't know what we're looking at or how we're approaching things. Again, I didn't have this dream or goal of being something. I was in the Air Force and I had finished my degree. I was on my officer training, and they called all of the women in and said, you haven't had the chance to do your aptitude tests. If you would like to choose your to do your aptitude test now to become a pilot, and you weren't allowed to be a fast jet pilot then, only multi-engine or helicopter, then you can go and do it. And I just shot my hand up, but only because I could go home and have a cup of tea with my mum, because the aptitude tests were close to home. So again, I had no inkling of what flying was going to be like, but I passed my aptitude test, passed my medical. And even before that you are allowed in the aeroplane, you have to do all of your ground school exams. But I'd just come out of an engineering degree, so they were all quite easy. I went on my survival course, which you don't get in everyday flying training, but you have to learn to do survival. And then I had my first flight in something called the Chipmunk, and I just fell in love.
What is a survival course, by the way? I'm actually intrigued.
No, a survival course is, because you're flying military aircraft, what happens if you end up having to crash land or eject later on when you have an ejection seat? How do you manage to look after yourself when you might not have food and drink? And so this was a week-long course where, in fact, there was a blizzard out, and it was like when everybody was being told to stay at home, and we were put in somewhere in Yorkshire in our flying suits with a parachute, and we had to build our own tents. It's like some television program, really, and lived off. We found a rabbit to live off, and didn't eat much. It was good.
So did you end up falling in love with flying and aviation during your flight training? Because what you're explaining does seem very daring and exciting. So did you, once you was in flight training, you was like, you know what, this is pretty cool and I actually really enjoy this?
Flying training is really quite different today than it was back in the day. In fact, I started off on something called elementary flying training, or EFT, at a place called RAF Swinderby, had just over 66 hours on the Chipmunk. Of course, a Chipmunk is a tail dragger. So when you are taxiing, you can't see out of the front. So you have to taxi like this to be able to weave along. And I will say that I once ground looped a Chipmunk, which, if you know what that is, whoa, that is something to do. But of course, when I finished from there, which was really that rudimentary flying training to see whether I had the skills to do it, I then moved on to a jet provost. It's a jet engine, sit on an ejection seat, this time side by side with your instructor. You have a nose wheel, so you're no longer having to taxi like that. And things move faster, so you're now flying around 240 knots.
Joe, you mentioned earlier that only 10% of women were able to get the sponsorship for the engineering course. Did you ever feel the pressure of representing women in such a male-dominated environment, or were you mainly focused on proving yourself as a pilot?
Yeah, I don't think I thought about it like that. I mean, I've got two brothers. I've always been friends with men and women. And I was aware that there weren't many women around, of course, but I just was getting on with it. And once you're in the system, you are trying to just be the best version of yourself. And when you look at flying training, because when I went on from the jet provost, I went on to fly the Hawk, and I could only become an instructor on the Hawk. Things go really fast then, 420 knots. But then the announcement was made that women could go all the way to fly fast jets on the front line. And so I continued to progress in that way. But again, I think you're so caught up with, it's hard, right? It's, 3 years of professional flying training on top of my degree before I got onto a frontline squadron, and you are just focused and you just want to make it, and people are being chopped on the way who aren't making it. So there's a lot of pressure, let alone, the gender bit.
Yeah.
I did get
no,
Y-front issued with Y-front long johns though, because they only had that. And of course, that's something when you're a pioneer and you're new, you have to just expect stuff to be a bit messy and it's not fixed when you're there. But what a great opportunity. I was just lucky enough to have been the right age at the right time.
What were your ambitions growing up? Did you ever dream of being in a particular career or particular field? Or do you find that aviation and engineering just happened to find you by chance?
Yeah, no, when I was young, I wanted to be a hairdresser. Really would have loved to be a hairdresser. Then I went on to want to be a doctor. And then I decided I want to be an accountant. Yeah. So, I mean, how do we know when we're younger, Don't know at all.
I mean, certainly for me, I had a desire to be a pilot. I've had a desire to be a pilot since I was 8. So I guess it differs from person to person.
And it's really interesting, Maya, because it's so different now. So what gave you that desire to become a pilot? What was it?
That's an interesting question. I think my desire to be a pilot stems from absolutely loving to fly and travel when I was younger. Go abroad with my family on holiday, I absolutely loved it. And I remember particularly once when I was 8 years old, just looking outside the window and just thinking, this is where I want to be. I want to fly. I want to be a pilot. So since then, it's been on my heart that I want to fly a plane. Yeah,
and
that's it, really.
And it's wonderful because what you have is had the opportunity to be able to experience that and therefore see it. And I think, again, when we look at how do we get a bigger pool of people interested in things, how do we share these sorts of experiences? How can you bring that to life for somebody who might only ever see it on, back in the day in a magazine, because of course we didn't have the internet when I was growing up or anything like that. So the fact that things have changed so much and aviation and the whole commercial world and the world has opened up with the amount we fly has an impact on young people being able to see what opportunities there are. In fact, I did a video the other day for the National Space Academy talking about engineering and flight, but talking about space and, of course, all of the opportunities for jobs in space. And when you look at that, it's so broad when you think about right from what food do people eat, all the way through to the design and the engineering as well as flying. And there's just so many different great things that can come from the space industry as well.
Yeah, I think having that access to aviation definitely widened my horizon specifically as well to want to become a pilot at such a young age.
And so what stage are you two? I know you're interviewing me, but this is what I always do. So what stage are you two at in your flying journeys?
So I just started my PPL about 2 months ago.
Wow. Have you been solo yet?
No, not yet. Hopefully soon.
Aitana, first solo is the scariest trip that you ever do. Because when you get airborne, you're like, oh, I've got to land myself. There's no one else in it.
Yes.
But once you've done it, it's great. You can do it.
Yeah, I mean, can you talk us through your first solo? What was that like?
Well, Maya, just tell me, where are you in your flying?
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, my flight training has been a bit sporadic. So I've taken a pause. I'm just saving and working and hoping to get back in the air very, very soon.
Here's a lot of money.
Exactly. And it's going to take a lot of dedication, hard work to get there. But none of those two things put me off. So I'm optimistic.
I love that. And also, you know, for people who want to get into the commercial world, I think there's so many, again, opportunities to go. I'm a member of the Honourable Company of Air Pilots, which anybody can join as, you know, I think as a sort of student or associate when you're learning to fly as well. But they actually have a whole website which is all about how do you get a career in aviation, and they run tests so that you can go and actually do some aptitude tests and get feedback and such like as well, which can be really good for people going into the commercial world. And then, of course, there's the military as an option for jobs. And many years ago, I was working for the Open University Business School, and we accredited Royal Navy flying training. So it's now a degree. So somebody who is going through flying training with the Royal Navy can actually be awarded a degree at the same time. And I did hear that the RAF might be doing something similar, which is good.
Yeah, there's so much more opportunities for young people available now who are interested in getting into aviation, and that is very, very wonderful. And hopefully through that, we will see more like representation and diversity within the aviation industry, particularly among female pilots.
My first attempt at a first solo was a little bit of a disaster, if I'm honest. So we went up and we were doing circuits, and then what happens is you land from your circuits, and you, instead of turning left as we were to taxi back, you turn right and you go to the tower, and the instructor jumps out. They say, well done, you're going to go do your first solo. And they sit in the tower and they watch you. And all you do is you get airborne and you fly one circuit and land, you know, pick them up and then go back again. But we landed and we didn't turn off right. We turned off left and we taxied back. And he just said, no, you're not good enough. You're not. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is a very short career. You know, this is like trip 13. I don't know if it felt like it was. I can't remember. It would be in my logbook. And I just remember feeling utterly devastated, and that voice in my head saying, you know, you're not good enough. You're not going to make it. You know, you might as well give up now, and feeling utterly despondent, right? Because I had fallen in love, and here I was only so many trips in, and I hadn't done my first solo. But what they did is they gave me a new instructor, and he was completely different in how he approached me. He was Australian, and I remember he like bounded over to me, and he was like, and they give you 2 more hours of flying. That's it. And if you're on review, and if you don't make it in those 2 hours, you're chopped, right? So the pressure is on. And it's very early. Could have gone and been an engineering officer and have been a completely different story. But he came up to me and he said to me, look, I watched your last landing. He said, I don't know what that guy's on, but I would have sent you solo. So don't worry. I will send you solo. But why don't we use those 2 hours? And I remember this little flicker of hope just starting inside me, deep in, and me thinking, perhaps I can do this. And I did. I flew those two trips with him. I did my first solo, and I didn't look back the rest of my flying career. But what I realized is how really clever he'd been in how he had just given me self-belief. And sometimes what we need is that we get so anxious and we get so worried and we get fearful that what we need somebody just to give us something to hang on to realize that we might be able to go and do this if we just give it a go and do our best.
Yeah, it's so important to have those people around you that can really help you in those moments where you feel, as you mentioned, quite despondent and may question your ability to do certain things. So it's really important to have that supportive community around you that can help you during those low moments where you feel like giving up. So that's really powerful that you shared that. Thank you, Jo.
Yeah, and also I think it's important to remember that, especially in your flight training journey, that you can change instructors if you want to. There's not always that one instructor you have to have, because I realize that some students, they forget that you can change instructors and they end up like being upset or not happy with the results that they're getting. So it's, for those that are watching, you can change your instructor if you want to.
And we all learn differently, you know, different people connect with, and it's the same with learning to drive cars as well. If you don't connect with somebody, then it is worth just saying,
Yeah.
Flying especially, you need to be able to relax. The other top tip I have is to, when you're feeling pressured when you're flying, and Atana, when you're doing, as you're coming up to your first solo, is wiggle your toes. Because you'll find when you wiggle your toes, you can't hold on to the flying controls too hard. It allows you to relax. If you just try now squeezing your hands and wiggling your toes, one of them has to give in. It's a bit like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. So it just, again, can help you keep that relaxation. And then one more trip. We used to we used to do formation flying. And when you fly in formation, what happens is you can get into a pilot-induced oscillation, a PIO, which means that you're a little bit far behind. So you have three different planes that you're looking at, so that you're in the right up, down, forward, back, in and out. And you're working really hard to be able to fly that. But what happens is you go, oh, I'm a little bit behind. I need to throttle up. So you throttle up and then you go sailing past. So you go, oh no, I'm a little bit in front. So I'll throttle back. And then you do that. So one of the tricks that I had was whatever throttle movement I put in, I would put it in and then halve it again. And so again, or with the stick, I would put it in and then bring it back and halve it. And I think there's something about how I learned that you can actually soften rather than doing bigger movements. You can become more subtle with it. And of course, over time, you get more and more practiced.
Thank you for your advice. Also, with the formation flying, does that mean that the runway is quite wide and big to fit all three planes? Or do you take one at a time?
You can do different formation takeoffs. So formation takeoff might be different from formation flying. So you might have a certain number of seconds that you are going behind. And so, yes, if we were lining up for a four-ship with the Tornadoes, for example, you have to be aware of what the jet wash is and such like. But you could get off airborne as a pair and you would just, they would give you hand signals and you would just roll at the same time. And you're just watching the person next person. You're not watching your own instruments. You're flying and watching to make sure you're in the right position, and then you just get airborne. But again, it all becomes easier with practice. We also did something called tail chasing, and that's when you are following and the aircraft in front will literally be doing aerobatics and things, and you are tail chasing and flying aerobatics after them as a way of formation. It's great fun.
That sounds really, really fun. Jo, being a pilot in the RAF, did you find that some people may have looked down on you being a female pilot, and question your abilities and what you are capable of achieving simply because you are female? Did you ever find that?
Yeah, I mean, again, when you're doing something for the first time, when you are new to it, there were some people, and only some, who had a belief that actually women shouldn't be doing it, which, when we think about it, right, it's a brain operating a machine. There is no reason, if you have the skills and capabilities and put the hard work into it, which it does, it's a lot of practice. And don't forget that you can practice when you're not in the aeroplane. You can practice either on simulators or cardboard cockpits, or even just thinking through over and over what you're going to go and do, because that will help your cognitive functioning and your brain be able to deal with the amount of input that it's having while your body is responding and being able to do the flying. Of course, you can't replicate the feeling of G and the, a bits of, but I love that whole G feeling and, and the shifts. In fact, when I used to fly air cadets, one of the things, I flew air cadets for over 10 years as a volunteer, teaching basic flying skills and doing some aerobatics. And I would do something called a roller coaster. And I'd say, do you love a roller coaster? And then I would try and do a roller coaster and then hopefully get them to 0 G so that they could float. So, which was quite fun.
That sounds so fun. Oh my days. I wish I had you when I was flying in air cadets.
And also another one I used to love doing is when the clouds are there is pretending that the clouds are low level. So you fly over the clouds and pretending that that's your low level flying. And again, it's good fun.
Yeah, it is. So, Jo, you flew with 617 Squadron, one of the RAF's most iconic squadrons. What makes it so iconic, and what tips would you give on how to stay calm and make good decisions when you're under immense pressure?
So 617 Squadron is known as the Dam Busters, and that came from the Second World War when Barnes Wallis with the bouncing bomb and managed to take out a dam. So if you don't know about it, anyone watching, go and have a look. Really, really interesting to see the history that sits behind it. So that really is quite an iconic squadron, and I feel very proud to be able to do that. The thing about decision making is that making no decision is a decision. And I think that that's worth thinking about, because when you are flying, one of the most important things that you need to be able to do is to be able to make the right decision at the right time. And that means that you need to have the confidence to make one. And if you've got it wrong, then let's make a different one. And next time, how do you learn? And I think the wonderful thing about flying that you just don't seem to get in the majority of workplaces is the debrief. Is how do we go and look at safety? What do we say that went well? What didn't go well? How could we have improved? And this ability to not only receive feedback, but also to give feedback to others so that we're continuously learning. And that starts to shift our mindsets into being people who are willing to adapt, to focus on learning, and to always have an eye open to being better than we are today, because that level of performance is so, so important.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Jo, for sharing that. Making no decision is a decision. I guess I never really thought of it like that, but I guess that is very true when you really think about it. So, Jo, you went from...
Sorry, Maya.
No, go ahead.
Can I give you an example about flying and not making a decision? So if you are flying towards an air traffic zone and you don't know which radio to do, you don't know quite where you are, you don't know what point is the turning point, and you just continue to travel forwards, you have chosen to continue to fly forwards. You've decided not to stop and just turn for a minute or call somebody or go on guard and ask for help, or, there are loads of different things. So that's what I mean, that actually that freeze that we can have of going, I don't know what to do. Actually, if you can think that when you're on the ground, if you can scenario play and think, what would I do if this happened? How do I look at my map when I'm approaching? How do I do my checks when I'm downwind over and over and over again so that they feel comfortable and fixed in me? It just helps, again, your ability to be able to get on with the flying and increases your situational awareness.
Yeah, totally. So, Jo, you went from flying fast jets in the RAF to then taking on senior leadership roles at PwC. For anyone who doesn't know, what is PwC? What did your role involve? And how did you adapt to such a different environment?
When I first left the Air Force, I worked for a cybersecurity company. I then ran an online trading exchange in gas and electricity. I ran my own consulting firm, doing various work. I worked for one of the business schools. I'd done my MBA, and then I loved it so much, I wanted to then teach. So I taught for one of the business schools for 17 years, did consulting with them. So I did all of this, which then led me to PwC. PwC is one of what's called the Big Four. It's a large accounting and consultancy firm, and it's all over the world with different offices, which really is helping organizations be able to have the capability that they might not be able to have or only need for a short time. And whilst I was there, I had some really good jobs. I kept moving around and doing different things. I joined for 3 and I did 9 years. I was chief of staff for our board member for technology and investments, and was part of a massive global digital upskilling for, nigh on 300,000 people in over 150 territories. And then I worked in Australia at one point. I traveled all over the world, and I also co-created and led our Centre for Transformative Leadership. So then started working in AI, and then left after 9 years, like I say, having only meant to stay for 3.
Wow. And leaving the RAF, did that feel like a part of your identity was lost almost? Or how did that feel, just going from flying fast jets just to being on the ground so much more?
Yeah, I mean, it did. It's Maya, you make decisions for various reasons at different parts of your life. And I think that one of the things that I would highly recommend anybody finds is a good mentor, is somebody who will speak truth to you, who will step up when they think you're doing something and say, do you know what? I think you should do it this way. Because getting over ourselves can be one of the hardest things that we have to do. And I went through a bit of a difficult time at some stage. And so some of the decisions I made were based on that. I will say though, and it did feel weird, but I joined the Air Force 40 years ago this September. 40 years ago, I know. And in that 40 years, I've only had 6 years where I haven't either been full-time or a reservist. So whilst I was out for 6 years, I then went back to flying. I did my commercial pilot's license. And then I went back flying air cadets as a volunteer. And I'm now a member of 601 Squadron, which is a Royal Air Force Auxiliary Squadron, which is providing sort of access, advocacy, advice to senior leadership, using the business side of it to the Royal Air Force. So yeah, really interesting that I still get to put my uniform on even 40 years later.
That honestly must feel amazing. I know that when I left Air Cadets, I'm still feel quite heartbroken, to be honest, because last year I was fortunate enough to go to RAF Cromwell to watch the handover. And that honestly made me cry, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, it must feel really nice to still be able to wear your blues.
And Aitana, that you can go and become a leader in the Air Cadets, and you can go and volunteer. And so you could still be involved, And there are other reservist roles. So don't think that you can't go and do something.
Okay. I'll definitely look into it. And also you mentioned that you went back to get your commercial pilot license. Is that because you didn't get it in the RAF?
Yeah, so in the RAF, you don't really do a license. It's very strange, right? Didn't have a PPL, didn't have anything. But I am a trained pilot who is working in the military. But what there's some concessions given depending on what you flew. So if I had been for example, a Hercules pilot, I would be able to use all of those hours as part of my CPL or frozen ATPL because it was valid. My hours counted, but I still needed to go and do my license. So I had to do all the exams, all the ground school exams, which are quite tough for anybody who's looking at CPL exams. But I passed all of those, did a wonderful crammer course with a place called Bristol Ground School back in the day. And then because I was a current pilot, I didn't actually need to do my CPL, but I had to go and do my instrument rating. And I had to do that totally separately, even though I had an instrument rating in the military. And also because the Tornado, whilst it's got 2 engines, the engines aren't far enough away from each other to have asymmetric thrust. So therefore I had to go and do a twin engine rating as well. So there are elements that you have to do. Yeah. And then I got my licenses and then I thought, is this a job I actually want to go and do? Because I know myself and I'm not very good at sitting still. You have got me on my best behavior, but I can already feel myself starting to twitch a bit. And so perhaps I wouldn't have been the right person to take you on holiday. Maya, when you were saying you were looking out the window, I'd have been like, quick, let's do a little roll or something, might not.
Oh no. Wow.
Jo, resilience has clearly been a big part of the journey. Obviously, you going from one industry to another, it clearly shows that becoming a pilot you're able to transfer all your skills into other industries. When things didn't go to plan or when things don't go to plan, how do you pick yourself up and keep moving forward?
I think having people that you can share the difficulties of life with is really important. That we're born to live in community and to go and, get advice from people. My mum has been an amazing person who has listened to me whinge and moan, and now my daughters ring up and can whinge and moan at me. So it all comes round about, doesn't it? So I think that that's really important. And knowing that you have got through every bad day you've ever had. Every bad day. And know that, my mum used to have an expression which was, there will always be a low following a high. So if you've just had the most amazing thing happened, or something's been a brilliant holiday, or you've been away or whatever, know that you might feel a bit flat afterwards. And that's part of the cycle of life, that you get amazing stuff happen, get a lot of boring stuff, and then you get some bit of rubbish stuff. But how do you surround yourself with the right people who are just going to help lift you when you need that, and know that you never need to be alone?
It's really good that you mentioned that, because it's important, especially in the aviation industry, which is a very niche industry, that we have a community to help us grow and obviously deal with flight training and the stress that it may cause. So thank you for your advice.
And I would like to say about stress that, again, I would not function well without stress. There's zero stress. I am like, what am I going to do? So again, stress isn't always a bad thing. It's when the stress is starting to be debilitating, when it's starting to affect our ability to function well, then that's when we need to talk about it. That's when we need to find a way to, I call it a stress bucket. It doesn't matter what's been thrown in your stress bucket, but how do you de-stress when you need to? And especially with flying, if you recognize that you're not feeling on top form, then remember it's a flight safety issue and you do need to call that out.
So, Jo, you are also the founder of Saltin Limited. Could you tell us a bit more about what your consultancy does, what inspired you to create it, and what are some of the biggest challenges your clients come to you with?
So it started 23 years ago or something, I think it was. And it was a friend of mine came up to me and said, would you come speak at the Women's Leadership Summit for the Institute of Directors in London? And I had never done a speech ever in my life. And I said, I don't know about that. And he said, look, I'll help you. Name's John Peters. And he had been speaking. He was an ex-Tornado pilot as well. And he helped me write this first speech, which was 20 minutes long. And I practiced it on everybody. I think they were sick to hearing my 20 minutes. And I stood behind a lectern and I presented this 20 minutes. But people came up to me afterwards and they said, my goodness, that was amazing. You should do that professionally. And then what happened is I started to get bookings, and they were quite small ones at first. And I did some consultancy work through it. And again, it was all word of mouth through people that I knew. And I have still been, my last speech was today, just to put it in context. But now I moved from the lectern to having cards that I would have like my stories written on, and I would use them until I got to one card. And now I have nothing, because I've practiced and I can just stand up and tell my story and use the themes that I have. And because I work with so many different organizations, I would utterly say that the difficulty that people are really struggling with at the moment is the whole, how do we shift our mindset with the technology changes that are coming? How do you start to become more adaptive? And actually, all of these skills that we've been talking about already and that are relevant for flying are completely true for responding in the AI world. How are we creative? How do we make decisions? How do we challenge? How do we speak truth where we need it? How do we bring the wonderful adaptability and creativity of human beings to a future which needs to be better than the one we're in at the moment?
That's really interesting that you mentioned your first speaking engagement. You were very hesitant to accept the opportunity. It's something that we spoke about previously on the podcast about confidence, how it doesn't come initially. You don't just become confident and then just go and do a thing. It happens gradually through practice and through repetition. So it's quite very inspiring that over time, as you've continued to do more speaking engagements and speaking to people, that you're now at the stage where you're like, I don't need any cards. I can do this because you've practiced so much. And that is how you become confident, by doing the same thing again and again. And yeah, that's really, really inspiring. So thank you for sharing that, Jo. I also just quickly wanted to ask you you mentioned about the change in technology and how your consultancy kind of helps people deal with that. What do you think, how do you think the aviation industry has changed over the past few decades since you was flying and then flying now, in terms of AI and modernization and all the technological advancements that are happening in our world now? How do you think flying and aviation has really changed over the past few decades?
It's changed quite a lot. I managed to get a flight in the back of a Typhoon, Eurofighter Typhoon, just 4 years ago. And oh my goodness, it was so easy to fly this jet in comparison to the heavy Tornado and the kit in it, so again, and that's, you could argue that's relatively old when you now look at the F-35. And I flew in a Harrier once, a Harrier jump jet, again in the back seat, and we hovered, and oh my goodness, it was all over the place. And then you look at the F-35, which is just stationary because, the computer is doing it. So the evolution of drones and what that might mean, whether, we talk about having driverless cars, I am still not convinced anybody would want to get into a pilotless aeroplane, because what if something went wrong? Who would be in it? So I do think that the jobs are safe for a while, but it does mean that we need to say, how do we keep humans in the loop? And how do we use technology so that we can be safer, we can be more efficient, we can be more effective, we can think about fuel and about the impact on the environment, and start to use it really again to better the environment and our society and how we live in the day-to-day.
Yeah, I honestly think that we should honestly still keep humans in the loop of most things. For example, flying a plane or driving a car. I would not put myself in a self-drive car, to be honest, because also at the same time, you have to think about human factors and how we will react quicker possibly than a robot might react to, because of they can't see it in real time. And yeah, I don't think that we should let robots drive things. So, Joe, it's safe to say that you've had such a high performing career. How do you switch off, recharge, and maintain a healthy balance outside of work? You mentioned that when you're not stressed, you do get stuck sometimes. So, how do you deal with that?
I have a very busy life. I think, having brought up two young ladies and safely into their 20s, and they've both left home. We have two dogs. We have a VW split screen camper van, the original one with the little windows, safari windows that pop open for us to go camping in. And my hobby is sewing, and I make bags and quilts. And I love the fact, again, that I am being creative and using my hands and keeping myself busy.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. I really resonate with you, honestly, because when I'm not flying or when I'm not working on anything, I always try and find to do something that still keeps me in that creative mode. I like to sew as well. I even tried to make a skirt one time. It's still in my wardrobe. I don't know if I'm gonna wear it, but yeah, it's just, I
Practice.
feel like,
Practice,
yeah,
Aitana,
I feel like
practice. Yeah.
with us as pilots or aspiring pilots, I feel like it's very common for all of us to try and find that same creative and keeping our brain active activity to help us stay happy and calm, I guess.
Yeah, so Joe, looking back on everything you have achieved, from being in the RAF to taking on leadership roles, to becoming an author, a keynote speaker, and even receiving an invitation from Tom Cruise to the Top Gun Maverick premiere, what moment are you most proud of, and why?
I am most proud of having my two daughters and bringing them safely into the world and then safely into the adult world, because I think it is tough, right? Growing up in, with social media and the challenges that you have today and with our education system. So they're my number one and my number two. And my number three is the day that I received my fast jet wings, when they were pinned to my chest, and the fact that I realized that I had achieved, what so many people dream of and so very few manage to do. And I feel blessed for having done that.
That's so wholesome and touching that you mentioned that your most proudest moment isn't all your accolades and things that you've achieved, but it's in fact having your two daughters. That's really, really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Joe.
And for those that are listening, Joe, if there's one message you'd like to give to every young woman listening to take away from this conversation, especially those who dream of a career in aviation or leadership, what would it be?
My message really is, give yourself permission to go and try. Don't worry about not making it. There are voices in our heads that, say, yeah, but you won't make it. There's no point. Just say no to them. And my mum had bought me a book when I was 22 called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I think that, how do you make that feeling in your tummy of fear, which actually is really close to excitement? How do you just think of it as the muscle that you're trying to expand and do more, so that you can just go and give things a go? Because we will regret the things we didn't do not the things we did. And I also remember my sister ringing me when I was in my 20s. And I remember her saying, Jo, I used to think being a fighter pilot was something special, but if you can do it, then anyone can do it.
That's great. Feel the fear and do it anyway. Those are some words that I'll be taking with me from this conversation. So thank you so much, Jo, for sharing your story with us. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to have you on the Fly With Her podcast today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to meet you both and hear about your flying stories. And I can't wait to hear about how you both get on.
Thank you so much, Jo. So that is it for today. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the Fly With Her podcast.
Don't forget to tune in, take off, and fly with her.
See you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.